What a few weeks, and what a few days we've witnessed. Moscow never seems to catch a break. Sometimes for the better, like its apparent friendship with Donald Trump, but sometimes for the worse. And no, this time I'm not referring to Ukraine. We're referring to the defeats it has been suffering in recent months all over Europe, in countries it had been trying to get its hands on through soldiers, lackeys, collaborators, and what many might call lapdogs, well greased with Moscow's money and resources. Oil and gas money continues to work wonders. VisualPolitik community, let me be completely blunt. I believe that the context we are living in demands it. Vladimir Putin is a tyrant. Let's not fool ourselves. He is a satrap of the worst kind. Genocidal. We're talking about a guy who leads his country with an iron fist, a place where there is no freedom of expression, where there is no real political opposition, where inconvenient people are eliminated. A country where there will be no woke ideology, but where ordinary Russians simply don't count. Life doesn't count. The tens and tens of thousands of young people sent to Ukraine to die or suffer lifelong injuries in the name of the emperor testify to this. Vladimir Putin's Russia, besides being a rather poor country and totally dependent on raw materials, is a mafia state. Without freedom and without respect for life and human dignity. This is the harsh reality. I'm sure that most of you who are watching us wouldn't want to live in this place. And if not, guess what? Now you have the opportunity to live this fantasy in first person.
Putin has decided that Russia is going to be a safe haven for people who want to trade liberal Western ways for Russian moral values.
In August, Putin signed a decree implementing the so-called Shared Values Visa. This visa allows foreigners who share Russia's traditional values to apply for residency in the country without having to take language or history or law exams or anything else. All you need to do is oppose what the decree itself describes as the destructive neoliberal ideology. So there you have it. Do you want to live the dream of Putin's Russia? Traditional values, iron fist, heterosexuality on steroids. Now you can. Apply now for your visa. Warning, not suitable for softies and men with not much hair on their chests. Jokes aside, well, perhaps not so much of a joke for some. The point is that Vladimir Putin has an obsession to expand the tentacles of his power throughout Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, in those lands that he still considers to be under Moscow's mantle of power. Now, with the gift from the Trump administration, it may be that the move in Ukraine will work out well for him, or at least not as badly as expected. But, as I said, it's not all good news. Recently, in Moldova, their candidate failed in the elections. In Romania, their attempt to meddle in the elections was so blatant that in the end, it backfired. So much so that the elections had to be cancelled and postponed by the Supreme Court. We told you about it on this channel. And let's see. We will see what happens now in the new elections in May, whether Putin gets his new triumph or not. But for now, he's waiting in the wings. And that's not all. For now, and apart from the Ukraine negotiations, what we know is that Moscow could be about to suffer another heavy blow in the old continent. But why? Well, take a look.
Tens of thousands of students march against Serbian president. We're no longer alone.
Indeed. This time, we're talking about Serbia. For 3 months now, hundreds of thousands of Serbs have taken to the streets in protest against the government. Why? Well, you see, it all started with a tragic accident that shocked the entire Balkan country. On the first day of November 2024, 15 people lost their lives at the shiny new train station in Novi Sad. The station canopy collapsed in a matter of seconds. The protests soon began. Students, workers, and pensioners joined together to form the largest protests in 25 years, since those that brought down Slobodan Milosevic's government. In fact, analysts are clear. These protests not only resemble those of 2000, but are even better organized and pose a greater danger to the government of the current Serbian president, Aleksandar Vučić. We're talking about decentralized protests which do not have leaders that the government can capture, detain, intimidate, or bribe. And if to this we add the convening power of social media, well, we have the perfect recipe. A huge wave of discredit has fallen on the Serbian government. All this has led to news like this.
Serbian minister detained over fatal disaster at Novi Sad station. Serbian Prime Minister Milos Vučević resigns after months of protests.
Indeed, the Minister of Transport has been arrested and is under investigation. But the very Prime Minister has had to resign, as you can see. Now, has this been enough to stop the protests and the discrediting of this government? Well, no, it has not. Otherwise, we would not be talking about it. So the question logically is, why hasn't it? Well, you see, the point is that the protests, and in general a growing popular outcry, don't stop at demanding responsibility for the catastrophe in Novi Sad. No, the protesters are also calling for a radical change of course in the country, particularly a change that will put an end to what they see as Serbia's biggest problem, rampant corruption. And of course, this is not so unusual either. We're talking about one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. So the Serbs are wondering, how is it possible that a newly renovated station in which almost 55 million euros had been invested just collapsed? The Serbian government denies that it was because funds were diverted. At the moment, we don't know for sure. It may have been a structural failure, a bad design approach, a failure of the construction work. But it is unusual. Don't tell me that it's not strange. And of course, Serbs think it's very strange. And the problem is that if the accident had been due to the diversion of funds, as the protesters claim, we would most likely not know about it either, because corruption in this country is very rarely investigated and prosecuted. In any case, this is just one example, but perhaps it has been something of a turning point for the Serbs to say enough is enough. So the question is, but let's see, what the hell does this have to do with Putin? Well, the issue is that the Serbian government is one of the closest to Moscow in Europe. Many analysts now think that the European Union should play its cards. What are we talking about? Well, stay tuned, we'll tell you.
An offshoot of Moscow.
When we tell you that Russia could lose one of its European strongholds in Serbia, we are not exaggerating. Moscow has always found in Belgrade a faithful ally that many analysts have not hesitated to describe as a kind of Trojan horse within Europe. We're talking about two countries that are strongly united by religion and their social and political influence. Both are Orthodox Christian countries, and the power that this church has in the politics of both is enormous. Of course, that is not all. Serbia's friendship with Russia goes beyond culture and religion. After all, we can't forget that when NATO intervened in the Balkans in the 1990s, something that the Serbs still remember with bitterness, it was Russia that clearly sided with Yugoslavia and with what is now Serbia. What's more, in 2015, Russia itself went so far as to veto a condemnation in the UN Security Council over the Srebrenica massacres, in which 8,000 Bosnians were killed. Although, apart from that link, if there is one pragmatic reason why Serbia has continued to cultivate its relationship with Moscow, is none other than Kosovo. You know, the Balkan territory that declared its independence unilaterally in 2008, and that Serbia continues to claim as part of its national territory. And here, well, once again, it's a very similar story. While more and more countries in the world officially recognize Kosovo, Russia has positioned itself completely on the Serbian side. Naturally, they do it out of mere convenience, not because they are against separatism or anything like that. Let's not get into that mess. If Russia was really against unilateral declarations of independence, it wouldn't have supported the independence of both South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia. But anyway, the point is that they have supported Serbia. And in the end, with the passage of time, all these things have meant that the ties between Belgrade and Moscow have multiplied. And naturally, the Serbian government has been able to return Russian favors, poisoned favors, as some would say. For example, they have allowed the Russians to take over a large part of the country's energy control. Today, NIS, Serbia's national oil company, is majority owned by Gazprom, the major Russian oil and gas company. Although, well, this is something that could be about to change if Belgrade wants to avoid sanctions from Uncle Sam.
U.S. tells Serbia to zero out Russian ownership of largest national oil company.
Although, this news item you just saw is from before Trump's inauguration. Maybe now things have changed. In any case, what is also clear is that Serbia has continued to support Russia even after the invasion of Ukraine. Since then, it has not only given Moscow more energy deals, but has also refused to impose sanctions directly on Russia. And in spite of being a candidate country for EU membership, it has even continued to buy weapons from Moscow. In 2024, among other equipment, Serbia purchased a Russian electronic jamming anti-drone system known as Repellent. And for that reason, the European Union, a group that Vučić himself has allegedly claimed that Serbia wants to join, has already sent serious warnings.
EU warns Serbia, aligning with Russia contrary to stated goal of membership.
In September, the EU was very clear. No more nonsense. Either you break with Moscow once and for all, or you can write off your membership to the European Union. And this time the warning was clear, and it seemed to have an effect. In In recent months, Serbia has already cancelled the arms deals it had reached with Russia for 2025, and agreed to be clearer and more decisive in its support for Ukraine. But not surprisingly, even so, suspicions from the European Union continue to follow Vučić. And that is why many analysts have suggested that Brussels could tighten the screws by supporting the demonstrations, something they haven't really done yet. But the opportunity is evidently on the table. Of course, beyond the possible effect this support could have, don't forget that the Serbian people remain overwhelmingly pro-Russian. The reality is that Europe could be playing with fire. Whether they like it or not, the reality is very clear. As autocratic and corrupt as Vučić may be, he is a lesser evil. Indeed, many believe that rather than a lesser evil, he is a necessary evil for the region. But what are we talking about? Well, pay close attention. It's gonna get interesting.
Pact with the devil.
If you look at what is happening in Serbia these days, with university riots, protests, and corruption scandals, you might think that Brussels is eager to let go, and let Belgrade to its own devices. Right? Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. Despite everything, the European Union does not want to lose Serbia. In fact, this country could be a key player in its strategic interests in Brussels. Why? Well, basically, for two reasons: lithium and security.
EU and Serbia sign Lithium, deal with EV production and focus. EU car makers may tap Rio Tinto $2.4 billion lithium project. Officials vow mine won't harm environment to allay concerns.
At first glance, Serbia may not seem to be the most important country on the continent, but beneath its soil lies a resource that Europe desperately needs: lithium. And keep in mind, we're not talking about some small deposit, but the largest lithium reserve in all of Europe. Ukraine and Serbia are the two major powers in possession of this mineral in Europe. And there are those who believe that in the future, lithium will be something like the new white gold. Without it, the energy transition that Brussels preaches so heavily will not be possible. This mineral is essential for the manufacture of electric car batteries, but also for the manufacture of batteries for renewable energy storage. And what is the EU's problem right now? Exactly, that it's heavily dependent on China for lithium and other strategic minerals.
Von der Leyen, 97% of the lithium we use in the European Union is from China. What we do now is talk to other countries in the world to diversify the supply chains so that we don't have again a situation like with Russia, an overdependency, and then the potential for blackmail.
This is why Brussels has seen a unique opportunity in Serbia, and that is why in 2024, the EU and the Serbian government reached an agreement to exploit the country's lithium mines, a pact that would allow Europe to lead the ecological transition without relying on authoritarian regimes. But there is one problem. The Serbs are not very convinced that this will benefit them, and the Russians, who, let's not forget, still have a lot of influence in the country, hate the idea. The result, the mining project of the multinational Rio Tinto, has been one of the main sources of tensions in the country in recent years. We're talking about a project that was already stopped in 2022 to calm the protests of environmental activists. 2 years later, and after its reactivation, thousands of people have once again taken to the streets to protest against lithium mining, claiming that it will bring more pollution than prosperity. The Serbian president himself, Aleksandar Vučić, has had to maneuver carefully so as not to lose popular support while keeping Brussels happy. Be that as it may, one thing is clear. This project is not popular at all. And if Vučić's government were to collapse, it's possible that the whole thing would collapse. And VisualPolitik community, Europe is not willing to let Serbian lithium slip away so easily. What do we mean by that? Listen up.
The Serbian mafia's house of horror. The discovery of a house of horror near Belgrade, where Serbian mobsters tortured their rivals, shows that criminal organizations are ready to copy the brutality of Mexican cartels to gain control of drug trafficking in the Balkans.
VisualPolitik community, this is not a horror movie script. It is the brutal reality of Serbian organized crime. Let's see. The Balkans have always been a focus of instability and organized crime, but now Serbia, due to its geographical position and recent history, has become the epicenter of crime in the region. And watch out, because the most shocking thing is that its government is dangerously intertwined with these mafia networks. It's in the thick of it. And this is where we can, or rather, we have to talk about a crucial concept: state capture. This term is used when a government stops serving its citizens and starts serving private interests, in this case, the underworld crime groups. And Serbia is a textbook example. Since the fall of Slobodan Milosevic in 2000, Serbia was supposed to move toward democracy, but instead, the country has fallen into a system of rampant corruption where organized crime and political power go closely hand in hand. On the one hand, the government tolerates the existence of these groups, allowing them to operate in exchange for certain favors, such as illegal financing for electoral campaigns, or the use of mafia thugs to intimidate opponents and journalists. At the same time, when international pressure is too strong, Vučić makes some token arrests to pretend that he is fighting organized crime, that everything is under control, but of course, without really affecting the structure of these groups. And this is where Veljko Belivuk, aka The Problem, comes in. Belivuk was the leader of one of the country's most violent criminal gangs, which incidentally was linked to the Belgrade partisan ultras. His specialty? Extortion, drug trafficking, and contract killings. A real piece of work. Well, pay attention because he wasn't acting alone. According to his statements at a court hearing, Belivuk claimed that his gang had been created on the orders of Aleksandar Vučić to satisfy his political needs. You could say Belivuk and his men were the regime's thugs, engaged in intimidating opponents and organizing attacks against anti-government demonstrations. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. The European Union has been criticizing Serbia's lack of democracy and its ties to organized crime for years, but it does nothing about it. Why? Well, basically because Brussels needs Vučić.
Von der Leyen praises Vučic's steps towards accession. Serbia's future is in the EU.
Serbia is not only a country with internal problems, it's also a geopolitical powder keg. Within its territory operates not only ultra-dangerous underworld groups, but also ultra-nationalist and extreme right-wing groups that are not only violent, but also have connections with Russia itself. To give you an idea, some of these groups have even sent fighters to Ukraine to join the Wagner group and have promoted the idea of a Greater Serbia, a concept that implies territorial expansion and could destabilize, once again, the entire Balkan region. So if Vučić were to disappear from the political map, Serbia could plunge into chaos, and a country in crisis with well-organized radical groups and a high penetration of Moscow could become a serious problem, not only for the Balkans, but for the whole of Europe. The Balkan underworld groups could continue to expand their influence in the old continent unchecked, as could the ultra-nationalist groups that have found fertile ground in Serbia to grow and could eventually end up provoking new conflicts. If Serbia derails, the Balkans could go up in flames again, and certainly no one in Brussels wants to see a new war in the region. So even though Vučić is an autocrat with criminal ties and connections to Russia, the EU seems to prefer to turn a blind eye and treat him as a necessary partner to at least keep these groups at bay. That is to say, to keep in power the one they consider the lesser evil. Perhaps that's why his candidacy for accession to the Union has not yet been thrown out, nor do pro-European circles seem to have much intention of promoting the opposition. Well, that's where things stand. The only good news, perhaps, is that the government's growing social disrepute will cause it to turn more decisively from Moscow to Brussels. That would be fantastic news for the West, and lousy news for Vladimir Putin. But having said that, the question is, what do you think? Do you think the EU is doing the right thing by continuing to support Vučić? Leave us your opinions below in the comments, and we will start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, give it a like, and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. These are small gestures that help us out a lot. As always, thank you very much for watching. All the best. I'll see you next time.